Hello everyone, this is Mr. Taylor. I'm going to jump right into the content. This particular video and series of videos is going to introduce the idea of working with sources. In the last videos, we talked about a theoretical basis of argumentation. What is an argument? What are claims? What are premises? What are the appeals to argumentation or persuasion, ethos, pathos, and logos? And how do we design effective arguments? How do we identify assumptions? All of that good stuff. Now, what we're going to do now is look a little bit more at the writing side of that. We're going to go right back to APA, the style that we're working with and the style that you all will work with in the future with your writing and academic writing. And we're going to learn the stuff that will blow your mind, how to correctly cite your sources, make attributions, in-text citations, reference citations. On the very first slide for class, we discussed plagiarism, which means that when you take anyone's intellectual property or ideas and claim them for yourself, that it's considered plagiarism. It's against the law. It's against a lot of ethical standards and honor codes at universities. You cannot steal something that's not yours, including ideas and intellectual property. Whenever you bring in a source into a paper, a direct quote, anything in quotation marks, or even an idea that you're paraphrasing in some way without giving the appropriate source credit, you fall victim and are susceptible to the implications of plagiarism, which can result in lawsuits, jail time, being expelled from university if you're caught. It's something that you don't want to mess around with. It is a serious, serious thing. And what our style guides do in academic writing, aside from making the writing consistent across disciplines to make the writing look the same, the formatting look the same, it actually helps us make sure that we're avoiding plagiarism by accurately citing our sources. If you don't know, citing sources is referring to giving credit to the appropriate author of the idea that you are using. In the previous slide, I made a point to emphasize that research papers are not regurgitation of information. You do have to present claims and evidence and support for an argument that you're making, but you're repurposing it, looking at it through a different lens or perspective, or you're taking the information that already exists and using it in a different way to make a slightly different argument or a different point than those that already exist in the conversation. And because of this, you are presenting evidence and you're presenting ideas and data and stories and all types of different sources into your work to help make your claim, but in a different way. And so what these slides are going to do is take you through working with sources, how you find your sources. It's going to take you through how you start making basic citations, how you locate how to make a citation based on the type of source that you're looking at. All of this is crucial. This is all the important stuff that will save you from falling victim to plagiarism. And I don't want that to happen to anyone. I can say this because I've sat on the honors code and the honors board at Wingate University and every other university for which I've worked, and I see plagiarism cases every single semester. One thing that is not considered acceptable or is a non-negotiable is claiming ignorance. Oh, I did not know I was committing plagiarism. I had no clue that I was doing this, or this is my idea, even though it already exists in the world. One thing that's not accepted is claiming ignorance. If you commit plagiarism, you commit plagiarism. It's on you as an academic to verify that your content is yours and yours only. And if you are using someone else's content, you are changing it in such a way that you're fitting it into your writing and making it your own, but you're still giving credit for those who own that idea. The agenda here is, if I can click here. The administrative updates you've already seen. You've already had an introduction to argumentation and persuasion from a theoretical lens. What does it mean? How do we get from getting our thoughts on paper to building an argument, a credible argument for ourselves, to research, bridging that gap between those ideas? Let's do a quick synopsis of why this matters. On the slide in front of you, you'll see sources equal evidence for your claims. Remember, in any type of academic research or writing, you present a thesis, a purpose, a claim for your argument. Then you will have other claims throughout that paper to further support that thesis. In those subpoints, main point A, B, and C, you're going to integrate evidence to support those claims. And when you bring evidence in, it's going to appeal to your ethos or credibility, pathos, ability to leverage emotion, and logos, your ability to utilize logic and reasoning. The sources you pick will also be a reflection of your own ethos, pathos, and logos. Are you picking sources that balance all three of those appeals? And are you also doing it yourself in your own writing? Are you leveraging those three appeals? Remember in the last section of videos, we talked about the importance of an effective argument being an equilateral balance, an equal balance of all three of those appeals in your writing. Balance of those ethos, pathos, logos equals effective argument, and an effective argument is an academic argument. Research is an academic argument. So we have to be mindful of these things. We have to always keep in mind appeals to ethos, pathos, and logos when we're going out trying to locate a source to help support a claim, but also in our own writing and how we present our own evidence and how we integrate that into our own ideas as we present them. There are several different types of sources, but we're going to talk about the different levels of sources. The first level is the primary source. It depends on the discipline and the context. This can be an original document, a report, a first-hand account, an original starting point for later writing in which the first is explored, analyzed, and discussed. So when we look at primary sources, for instance, for English majors, a piece of literature that someone may be analyzing would be the primary source. For biology majors, actual data or results of an experiment or observations from an experiment may be the source, the primary source. For sociology majors, diaries, journals may be a primary source. For communication majors, looking at newspaper articles or looking at media coverage of a certain event at a certain time may be a primary source. It is the initial content that others will take and through secondary and tertiary sources start analyzing and looking at correlations and variables and how the results impact a certain idea or phenomenon. Secondary source makes use of primary sources by repurposing the information and the ideas in them. If we look at those similar ideas we just observed for English, a text examining certain aspects of a piece of literature. So if we look at literature analysis or a paper that's discussing the symbolism of the color yellow in a certain literary work, that analysis of that original primary source would be considered your secondary source. For biology, a text examining the data from a study to draw a conclusion or to analyze the study or the phenomenon therein would be a secondary source. So in other words, this would be a paper reflecting on the results or implications of actual data from a study. Sociology, a text that examines trends in diaries, journals, and first-hand accounts. We call this content analysis typically. So what you can see is that a secondary source is purposefully using the primary source to draw some kind of conclusion or to steer it in some type of direction through the reasoning process to make a conclusion in some kind of way. Tertiary source relies exclusively on secondary sources. They restate and repurpose the information in secondary sources by surveying, reviewing, synthesizing, or commenting upon that information. These would be your encyclopedia articles, Wikipedia, which is non-academic, traditional research papers, literature reviews, and analyses. So when we think of research papers at the college level, research papers in themselves are going to usually be tertiary sources. They're going to tap into what others are saying about a primary source. Seeing where the academic conversation is regarding a phenomenon by looking at how someone else has analyzed a primary source in some kind of way. It's usually a mixture, and academic research papers will also dip into and refer to the primary source. And so really what you're looking at is a mixture of source levels at the tertiary level. Tertiary meaning third level. Primary first, secondary clearly second, tertiary third. So research papers are going to rely mostly on those secondary sources where other academics, other professionals in the field have already looked at primary sources and repurposed them in some kind of way using their expertise in their fields of which they are professionals. But tertiary sources also use primary sources and can refer to the direct source when it's needed, depending on the topic. So it's really just a mixture But it's important to know those three types of sources. When you need to get at the heart of something, you can go straight to the primary source itself, the data, the direct news coverage of something, the journal entries, all of those things. When you want to look at what someone else is saying about that initial data or look at the different interpretations of that, you would refer to a secondary source. And then a tertiary source we will also use, but a tertiary source is mostly what you're going to make, is the type or level of the source that you're going to engage in when you're writing your research papers. Depending on the context of the topic and what you're studying, some authors include both sources in different ways to show where their argument fits into the ongoing conversation. This is really important, and it shows and reflects the dynamic nature of academic conversation, recognizing that there are oppositional viewpoints that exist, and all sides of the conversation, all sides of the argument are often incorporated into research to show where the argument and the claims you were making fit into those that already exist, how they differ from arguments that's already been made, how they're similar, all of those different pieces. And so that's where context is important. But the main thing to think about when it comes to levels of research is you are going to be producing tertiary level research using primarily secondary sources and primary sources, but you will sometimes use other tertiary sources. But it's important to know the distinction between the three. We've already talked about style guides. I'm not going to go over that again and waste any time. We know there are different style guides for different disciplines, and they all exist because different disciplines research in different ways or present literature in different ways or discuss literature or make arguments in different ways. It depends on your field. Most of the social behavioral sciences and most of the common types of disciplines and fields that work with human interaction, human behaviors, will always use American Psychological Association. But say, for instance, you were an English major or you were from the humanities, such as philosophy, where you're examining literature, examining rhetorical pieces of philosophy from the Greeks. That would be more of a modern language association style guide, and it's designed to effectively be able to analyze and cite those primary sources as its own unique style guide as it pertains to those disciplines. Chicago is mostly an editorial and communication-based or media-based style guide, and it's most often used for those media studies, those who are in broadcast journalism, and it's built and designed so that the study of broadcast journalism and the study of media, mass media, is done so in a way that's consistent and works better for that discipline. Then there are a plethora of others, ACS, AMA, MHRA, Oxford. There are tons of different style guides, and they exist to make the writing and the research easier, consistent, and to make it all work in a way that is fluid for a different discipline. APA, let's take a little bit more of a closer look at APA, American Psychological. It's the most commonly used among disciplines. It's most commonly affiliated with social or behavioral sciences, so psychology, communication, education, accounting, mathematics, any of these types of base fields that have to do with human interaction, human behavior, or cognition typically tap into APA. APA formatting refers to the way in which one writes to specific disciplines, but also refers to the overall formatting as well as how to make citations. So when we think of our style guide, we know what a style guide is now, but now we have to ask ourselves, why do they exist? To make things consistent, but what are the specific ways as writers that we use APA style? And that's for overall document formatting. That's your headers, your page numbers, your margin, your spacing, all those things we've already worked on. But that's also the organization of your document, what sections go where and why. And most importantly, to avoid plagiarism and to give credit where it's due, that has to do with making citations, citing your sources, providing references that show where you are pulling your ideas and for whom they should be credited.